We never lived in that house for long, did we? Number 42 it was. I remember the fish, do you? The angel fish on the tiles in the bathroom. Black and white it was.
Number 22. Norwegian wood. "We'll take it," she said emphatically. He'd been right all along. He could always spot them. Her voice was bold, clear and strong. As she looked again at the grey shadow on the wallpaper, where there was a fresh stain, she seemed less reluctant than before. Then she sighed. But she knew exactly what she wanted, and when her husband looked across for a little more conviction and reassurance, she stepped back, put her hand out to grab the handle of the door to the lounge as if to support herself, and her voice broke just a little. She repeated herself with apparent desperation. "We'll take it." "Yes," her husband said, like an echo. "We'll take it, as she says." The estate agent, Michael Grimes, had let them in an hour earlier. To be honest, he was always reluctant to show the houses at this end of town. First-time buyers, second-generation immigrants who'd got one foot in the door, and people who were struggling to put any kind of roof over their heads were never fulfilling to sell to. It was all or nothing for them. They didn't need you to work hard to convince them to buy something that was really their only option. Or else it was a ridiculous fantasy that they had no chance of buying. He had at least one couple each weekend that he knew had no possibility of buying anything and were just window shopping for a new life, scouting the area to see what they were missing. It was the way the women touched things with their mouths slightly open as they walked around that gave it away. It was if they only had to push their tongues a little further out and taste the place, and it could be theirs. Or they put their hands gently on the fireplace or the edge of the bath, as if they had never touched such things before. In fact, it was nearly always a case of, "Yes, we'll take it." As it was evident to all, this was the lowest rung of the ladder locally. Or they simply stared in silence at the walls and the ceiling, as if it were art, a fantastic treasure, an inaccessible palace. But it was the hollow look and the sadness in the men's eyes that gave them away, their sorry realization that they couldn't do it. Not even for their sweethearts. It was obvious. The further along the high street you moved, each road sliding off at an angle signalled a better neighbourhood with bigger houses, more expansive gardens, greener lawns, and necessarily bigger mortgages, or a general reliance on inheritance. The houses became an idyllic mock Tudor fantasy. There was a real challenge in selling at that end of town, Michael thought. It took every nuance and seduction, the finest flirting, and the promise of so much more before the buyers would go all the way, so to speak. So much of buying and selling, or any transaction for that matter, was a moment of simple trust, a moment of consent and commitment. There weren't young buyers in that part of the town, and the easy successes of winning over any eager first-timers needed a lot more effort, and all his skill to coerce, cajole, and lure. Eye contact with women worked well, he soon learnt, but strangely he noticed, had once thought it a little odd, but being tactile with men worked better. Men liked touch. It was the act of touching, a muscle movement that clinched it. Not just a handshake at the outset, but resting a hand on his back, steering him into a room, smiling at his attempts at humour. His witty comments about someone's bad taste in decor were nothing to the hand, placed securely in the right place. He knew he had a sale by the time he could place his hand deliberately on the man's arm and leave it there, like reeling in a big fish. You really had to hold on. He looked from the husband, Tom, to his wife. She was Deborah, probably Debs, and back again. They were desperate to buy. He knew that as soon as he'd seen them. The husband was silently doing the calculations, looking at every crack, fault and problem, and adding in more costs. He was probably thinking he might have to make an offer. It was just about money then, now. The agent smoothed his hand over his bright paisley tie. Its wide blade of flagrant colour seemed otherworldly here. Too flashy, too exotic, pure flamboyance. But the ladies liked that too. Michael Grimes was wondering if they would have the necessary finance, as if this was another couple with a pipe dream wasting his Saturday afternoon. I could be doing all sorts of things, he thought, as he looked at the wife. She'd at least put some lipstick on and a trace of eyeliner. Her shoes were a little too worn, though, not promising. And as for Tom, his cuff was clearly frayed, but someone had at least stitched it and made an effort. It was always the little details that gave them away. Perhaps her frugality would make all the difference. Was it her? Did she make all the difference? Was Tom eternally grateful? Did he know how grateful he should be? Debs walked over towards the slightly darker patch on the wall just below the window and sniffed. She was good. She noticed the little details. But would she know if it was really rising damp or just a stain? Needs rather a lot of work, she said, doesn't it? It may seem so, but think of the potential here, the agent said. 800 is a very good price, and a sound investment for your future. Things are taking off again, so it's one step up on the proverbial. He strokes his thin moustache. The ginger hairs on his upper lip twitch as he says this, as much as if he is convincing himself too that things are really getting better. Then his pale eyelashes flicker, and his gaze wanders over the wife's lined face. It drops to her heavy breasts that fill her pretty summer dress, and the tip of his tongue moves tentatively across his upper lip. She sees his eager expression and smiles with what seems like innocence. He breathes heavily. He isn't yet sure if he can taste his success, but he scents it on all sides. She's being coy, he decides. His eyes drop further to stare at the large dome of her belly. She's wearing a bright floral mini dress that she has made herself. You can see a dart in the bust that isn't quite right. It should look very trendy, but the baby has pushed it out so that now she seems bell-shaped. The hem of the dress has been lifted by her enlarged body shape so that it looks as if she's only wearing a smock and has forgotten her slacks, as if she's half-dressed. He's attracted to this carefree, youthful fashion since he knows his mother would disapprove. She would have plenty to say about a woman walking out like this, especially in this condition. She'd say it was shameless. The word hussy comes to his mind, but he likes it. Hussy. Such an old word. From hussif, an old contraction of housewife. doing all she can to build a home. He looks at the wife's legs and thinks about Sandy Shaw on his television singing with her bare feet twisted. The effect turns and twists in him. He thinks about the toes neatly placed with each gentle step. His mother had tutted all the way through Ready, Steady, Go the other night, saying it was completely unnecessary to exhibit one's feet. But it had stirred more than just Michael's imagination. When Mrs. Rose had followed her husband up the narrow stairs, he had held back and stared up, even catching sight of her underwear. She was wearing polka-dot knickers. Naughty. She had nice legs and was wearing tights. But in this heat, he doesn't blame her. He runs his eyes gently along the fine line of her legs, and his tongue moves again in his mouth, where he pushes it into his cheek. He wonders how desperate she is, for the house, that is. What sacrifices might she make? He has instructions to reduce the price for a quick sale if necessary. But that won't be necessary, he thinks. He can push her, surely, and rely on Tom, the good old hubby here, to do the decent thing and stump up the readies for the full asking price. We've had a lot of interest in this one, he says then. A good first time buy, especially if you have some capital to refurbish, change the kitchen and so forth. It will make a nice little starter home. Cosy. Tom is good with his hands, she says. Michael looks at Tom and tacitly concurs. I bet he is, he thinks. And not just his hands. I fancy some of that split pine, Norwegian wood, like in the Beatles song, she adds. It would be lovely in the bathroom, wouldn't it, Tom? Tom says reluctantly, bending over the bath and looking up at the heating unit. He rattles the gas boiler that is hanging precariously over the bath. Is this safe? He asks, turning to the agent. Has it been checked lately? There is an ominous squeak as Tom touches it. I'm assured that it is all in good working order, Michael adds, smiling, and he changes the subject. When is baby due? He says cheerfully, and she places her hand on her belly as he looks down at it. She strokes the swelling a few times as if conjuring a future, stirring her imagination. Michael watches the gentle circular motion of her hands, and it stirs something in him too. Not till October, the husband says. Any chance we can be in before then? Michael's moustache twitches. All being well. If you wish to go ahead. Well, we haven't talked about the price yet, Tom says. Shouldn't we let the children see it first? She says. So there are more of them. They have been busy, Michael thinks. And not really that long out of school, I guess. Childhood sweethearts, How many bedrooms do you need then? The agent says, looking down at his clipboard. 3 will be fine if they're big enough. We have a girl and a boy already, so little in here will determine if the boy or the girl gets the box room. You'll only just squeeze a cot into the 3rd room, the agent says, as he pushes the door open at the top of the stairs. There is possibly room for a small infant bed, drawers, but nothing else. The small square window that needs stripping back and repainting looks out over the overgrown garden. Debbie follows Michael in, but he has to turn sideways and as he steps aside, she brushes past him, glancing his midriff. Tom has edged in too now, and it's a bit of a dance. Michael steps forward and touches Tom's elbow to steer him to the window. He rests one hand on Tom's shoulder, who doesn't flinch at all, and points out the boundary to the property. Perfect. Gotcha. Reel him in. There's a large wooden shed at the back with a concrete floor and garage doors opening out onto the lane behind. You get a car or a motorbike in there easily if you need to, the agent says. Do you have a car? Seen better days, but I'm sure a handyman such as yourself could fix it up. He smiles and looks at Tom, who turns round with his own smile of embarrassment. This flattery is another game. Flirt with the wives, flatter the husbands. And if they're single, whatever works best. He knows what to stroke to make a sale, and it isn't always simply an ego that needs manipulating. Mind if I take a look? Tom says. Outside? Michael says, as his eyes linger once more on the hemline of Mrs. Rose's dress. In the garage, Tom says, stepping to the door of the bedroom. Is it open? I'll need to unlock the back door, Michael says, and follows him out. They walk down the narrow path to the wooden garage, and the side door is locked. Someone has added a hefty galvanized clasp and locked it with a chunky padlock. Blast, Tom says. I really need to get in there. Don't you have the key? Sorry, it must be at the office. It's because the main garage doors don't actually lock. You can access it through from the lane. It's a 4 or 5 minute walk. Out past Carlton Parade and then left and left again to get behind. Someone sprayed 22 on the door, so you won't miss it. They just slide open. Will Mrs. Rose want to see it? I'll have to wait here unless we lock everything up and all go. Tom walks off on his own. I'm just going round the back to check the garage. Why don't you give the kitchen a good going over, he says. I don't think we'll be paying full price, Debs says, bold as brass. This all needs gutting. It has seen better days, but the cupboards are actually solid, the agent says, opening and closing a door as if to illustrate. They'll support a good weight, he says. These were a good investment in their day, still solid. And it closes with a reassuring but gentle thud. Is there any movement you can make on the price, she says. Well, we'll have to see. How big a movement did you have in mind? She takes a step towards him and places her finger on his tie. Well, what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Flashy Estate Agent with the silky tie? The light catches her leg and he looks down. They smile at each other. I can be quite accommodating, she says. And how much can you accommodate? Oh, I think I usually have a firm grasp of any situation, she says. A shadow flickers. The front door bell rings. Tom has to be let back in. He waits on the doorstep for a few moments with his hands in his pockets. Everything all right? Deb says. Big enough for you? Michael asks. Yes, fine, thank you. But he's not looking at Tom. His eyes are still on Deborah. She smiles. As I said, we'll take it. Might be a bit of a tight fit, but we can work something out. And she smiles. So, The price then? Tom asks. Any room for negotiation? Oh, it's all right, Michael says. It's fine, darling, don't you worry. Mike has already agreed to my offer. But it's really all right, sir. You have a very persuasive wife, and she has already beaten me down. I've dropped it to the minimum, 750. The old lady's solicitors needed to sell it quickly anyway, so no one is losing out. It's all win-win from here on in. Tom smiles and steps over to his wife. She looks up at him and kisses his cheek. So we'll need to meet up in the week, Mrs. Rose, for a little bit of paperwork to settle things formally. And you never know, when that job opens up in the spring, I might find some part-time work for you too. Just a half day or so at the weekend, if you could squeeze me in. I know you'll have a lot to do with the baby and all, but every little helps, as they say. When Tom and Debs walk away, they hold hands, and there is a definite jaunt in their steps. She is laughing, and Tom hugs her close. Michael pulls the door closed and turns the key. He smiles and wonders how he is going to encourage Barbara to quit her Saturday job. He is humming a tune and feeling quite joyful, and the words of the song come to his mind. Suddenly, he's not quite so confident if it is he who has had this girl, or if it is he, for once, who has been had.